Hello everyone. So I want to talk with you today about planning the service delivery system in a hospitality business. I'm not going to give a exhaustive description, rather some thoughts that I would like you to consider when planning this aspect. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually the plan and design of the service. A lot of times what we try to do in the hospitality industry, if the system is already running, one of the big issues we have is finding the problems within the system and trying to find what are the things that are not working. So typically one of the questions we ask ourselves is what are guests complaining about? And here the typical solution in hospitality industry is what we call the chain of screaming, where people just like there's a problem, you call the team, you scream at them, and then they go and they scream at their teams, and so on, so on, so on. But very, very, very little times this actually achieves a positive result towards the guest, or when it does, it's not created with the same sense as the alternative version. And the alternative version is to actually ask the team that is involved on this problem and ask them to analyze the problem and come up with solutions. Obviously, this works especially when you have people that are motivated about the work they do, but try to understand why is it that there is this problem within their unit, and ask them to analyze it, ask them to come up with solutions. So you're making them in a way part, not just they know they are part of the problem, but now you're making them part of the solution. And what you're going to figure out is that most of the times whatever problem we find in a hotel can always be traced back to a management decision. So in order to to design and create this system, we need to make sure that we understand the global point of view of the guest and of the managers as well. And we have to understand that every hospitality industry should spend whatever studying and planning time they have and every energy they have to get the system better, to get the system right. Because at the end of the day, the goal is always the same. The goal is to not fail any customers and to delight every guest in order to give them what we call the wow experience. So some guiding principles here that can help you on development of better systems. Study your customers in a minute detail. In other words, understand exactly what is the process they go through in the hotel, what is it their grievances, what is it that they like. Build a service delivery system that will provide the experience they expect from your organization, and therefore allows them to better understand as well what is the things that they can count on when they buy a hotel night or when they buy your hospitality service. And then you can also work on giving more than what they expected, because that is the key to providing excellent service. Monitor your system closely as well to try to find what are the mistakes, and we're going to talk about some techniques about that later on. Create an accurate early warning measures for each possible failure point, and again we're going to talk about how to do that later on, and different techniques that were developed throughout the years to find out these failure points in your guest experience. Engage everyone in the organization in watching those measures, and this has to do with the fact that an improvement of a system demands that people work in coordination, but at the same time it demands that they all they are all part of the system, and therefore only by engaging all of them can the system be improved. And finally, follow up on everything that doesn't meet your guest expectation for whatever reason. Find out everything that is related to creating a worse experience for your guests, because a lot of times what we're going to figure out is that many things that create bad experiences for the guests can all be traced down to just sometimes one root cause, and if you fix that, you can fix a lot of issues at the same time. So what happens in case that your system is failing? Well, I think there are three main actions that you can take when a system is failing. Failure occurs repeatedly at certain points, then you have to change your system itself, and you have to change it in a way that will eliminate these issues. If, for example, if you know that there is a problem that constantly occurs on a check-in across different people working on it, then the way you are doing check-in is wrong. So if service standards are unmet, find out why. Now, the service standards that you promise, if they're not being unmet, try to track back to what are the reasons, what are the specific service standards not being met, and what are the reasons for them not being met. Finally, if the organization has a service guarantee, be sure that the delivery system can meet and exceed that guarantee. In other words, be sure that you can actually change the things in a way that not only you guarantee the service you promise your guests, but you go over it. And this is the three actions that I believe are needed when your system is failing. So to develop service delivery systems, I believe there's a couple of tools that can help us. But first, we have to understand what are the phases that our guest goes through. Now, a guest arriving typically goes through three phases. Phase one is the planning the service delivery system. Phase two is monitoring the service, and phase three is assessing the experience to improve the service. In other words, plan, monitor, improve. So let's go with phase one. When does this happen? Well, this happens before the guest actually arrives and while he's waiting to go to our hotel or to our service, okay? For some cases, this phase can be quite long, sometimes months in advance. For some phases, this peak can be just a couple of hours before the guest makes the reservation. What is it that we have to work on? We have to work here on the expectations that the guest has. And this means like right before the hotel, it is important that we place the right degree of expectations into our customers. How do we do that? Through the pictures that we put on our website, through the testimonials we provide, through the answers we give on TripAdvisor. This is all creating expectations. Now, you want to create a level of expectations where the guest believes he's getting more worth for what he paid. But at the same time, you want to give expectations that are lower than the real service you're going to give. And this is very tricky because it's a thin balance that you have to maintain. So who are you targeting here? Here you're targeting your target customers, potential customers for your business. And how you do it is, for example, by setting service standards, by using techniques like blueprinting or universal service map, and so on, so on. I'll talk about these techniques later. Phase two is monitoring the service experience. So here the guest is already at our hotel or hospitality service, and during that time what basically happens is what we're trying to understand or what we're trying to measure is the experience that he is actually having. What experience is the guest actually going through? And obviously here we're not targeting target customers anymore, we're targeting actual customers, people actually in the hotel. And here the techniques that we use to do that is the applying service standards, is job performance standards, and there's many techniques we could talk here about, but at the end of the day it's about setting the standards and setting our systems. Phase three is assessing the experience to improve the system. In other words, the guest now has gone out of the hotel, is not with us anymore, and therefore we're going to be targeting the past guest. So this is the when are we analyzing this? We're analyzing our after guest experience after he left. And what we're trying to target here is the experience that he will remember. What is it that he remembers from the stay within our hospitality business? Was it a positive? Is it a positive memory or is it a negative memory? And so who are we targeting here? We're targeting past guests, current guests as well, potential future customers as well, because this will affect the whole system. I'm trying to get ideas on how to improve the system, and therefore it will affect all of them. And finally, here we have many things like guest assessment. For example, we can have comment cards, we can have surveys, we can have techniques like 1-800 numbers. I'm not going to cover that today, but you can find online what it is. And basically what we're doing is trying to measure how was his experience during our stay. So all these steps that we see over here, there is a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, obviously the steps we go through to improve our service. The first one is planning the system that I briefly have described, and we're going to talk a little bit about more techniques later on about how do we plan the delivery system. Also about monitoring the service experience is step 2, and here again we're trying to understand what the guest is going through on its own, what the guest is going through during the stay at the hotel, and we try to make that experience as positive as possible. Finally then, step 3 is assessing the experience and improving the system. We already spoke on previous one what can do, but there are 3 extra things here that I would like to bring up, which is what we call the concept of blurred lines. So some tasks is not very clear if they happen before the guest arrives or during the guest arrives or after guest arrives. For example, on the image that you see on the right, it says plan for and manage customer waits. Well, For example, while the customer is waiting to do check-in, what is this? Do we consider this before or do we consider this during the guest experience? It's a little bit of a blur line, so it is important to understand that some tasks can fall under different categories. Also, the concept of the self-healing system, on the sense that many problems, because we work with a lot of people and we can have a lot of very good staff, a lot of times when there is problems, your own staff will take care of improving the system and therefore create a cycle of self-healing itself, which is very good because it means that not all problems can be predicted. And it is this ability of the hospitality industry that makes it so fascinating in a way. And finally, remember that does not matter if you have a plan or not, at the end of the day, the cycle will go on. And so what does that mean? It means that if you have a cycle that tends to improve things with time, then it will always keep on improving. But if you have a cycle where you ignore the process or you don't have a plan at all, then what will happen is it will get worse and worse. And you probably know that from some hospitality businesses that you work with or that you know, that things just start getting worse and worse because management does not take actions to plan all these things. So what planning techniques do we have in terms of helping us create a delivery system? Well, the first one is called the blueprint, and a very famous example on trying to understand blueprint in hospitality is to create what we call the blueprint for a hot dog stand. In other words, we try to describe or we try to create a diagram about what is the guest experience throughout it. What we see here now is that from now on, a lot of the things that I covered in this lecture are very similar to project management concepts, and it is designed that way. For example, the technique we see right now, the blueprinting, is very famous on the methodologies like Six Sigma that allow for a process improvement. So what we're going to see now is a little bit of application of project management concepts and Six Sigma concepts to the hospitality industry. So one of the processes that I love the most is blueprinting, and I think it's very important to understand how long or how the typical guest goes through our system. And to create a good blueprinting, there's a couple of things we have to consider. First of all, what are the physical evidences that we have, physical assets, steps, locations, so on. What is the typical customer actions that the customer takes? Obviously, in a hot dog stand, it's quite simple because there's only, well, one action the customer can take, which is to order a hot dog. But what you probably realize is that in a hospitality business, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different actions that guests might take, and we have to predict them. We have to know what would they be. So we might end up with several blueprints. Then we have on-stage or visible contact employee actions. So this is the point where our guest interacts with an employee from the company, and therefore there is here the ability to get information or to improve the service. We call these moments of truth every time the guest interacts with the business. Then there's the backstage or invisible contact employee actions. This is the actions that normally guests don't see. For example, cleaning the housekeeping department would fall under this category because typically guests don't see it. If you have a guest, for example, that has a birthday while he's staying with your hotel, then you might drop, for example, a bottle of wine in his room as a little souvenir, or a card wishing him a happy birthday. And this is all examples of invisible blueprints that typically the guests don't see the action for. And finally, we also might have blueprints for supporting processes that help the overall organization of the business. So then another concept we might have is what we call the universal service map. Now, this is a map that is a little bit more complex, and it lines out the implementation and the internal interactions on the service industry. So there is here a line of visibility, things that the guest sees, and then there's a line that area that guests don't see. And there's also a line for guest interaction. So let me show you looks like. Well, it looks like this. There's a couple of lines here, as you can see, and basically what happens, let me just get my annotation here. So this line over here is the line of guest interaction. In other words, actions that are on this area over here, okay, are actions. All right, actions that the guest interacts with our business. Then we have lines of visibility. So if we go beyond this, means there is visibility of the tasks that are done. And here we have the line of internal interactions, which is lines that typically the guests don't see. Okay, so for example, just as an example here, record reservation for guest and reservation system, the guest typically does not see that. So in terms of, we start with the physical evidences. For example, reservation center website, hotel entrance, front desk or lobby, front desk elevators hallway, rooms and amenities, bill, front desk and lobby, and hotel entrance, employee dress. And all this, for example, then we try to understand what is the interactions we have here. I'll make another video just describing this graph because it's a little bit complex indeed, but it's a great tool for us to understand how the guest goes through in our hotel. So in terms, another technique we use is, there's many other techniques we can use to find problems, and this one is one of my favorites, called the fishbone or the Ishikawa diagram. And basically what you do is you come up with a problem, and this is an example I found in a book for delayed flight departures. So it's a research done, and then what we try to do is, so we have our problem in the main line, and then we define areas. For example, problems related to procedures, problems related to personnel, problems related to other, problems related to equipment, problems related to supporting evidence. And then we brainstorm the ideas that we might have for each one of the sections. And because your attention is much more focused on each one of the topics, you typically come up with many more ideas. Resource categories can also be another great way to do it, for example. But just letting you know, for example, another technique that we use that is very useful is called the Pareto analysis. So Pareto analysis is basically a graph or a table where we get information about the reasons why something is going wrong. Okay, so we try to understand the defects that there is in an industry, and therefore it is very important information, because the objective of the Pareto analysis is to understand what are the categories that give me the most amount of problems. So for example, if I go to this column over here that says percentage of incidents, I see that 41% of my incidents are related to late arriving aircraft. So now I know that this should be my number one priority when it comes to solve problems, and then I can go down that list. Another one that we have is network diagramming, and the network diagram, I have a class on it on project management. You can go check it later on, but basically what it happens is I try to describe the display of my project as a series of tasks, and then the difference here that I use in hospitality is that I use this network diagram to identify my critical paths, my tasks that are absolutely essential to make sure that I finish the project on time, and I make sure that I manage them so that there's no problems of delays. And this can be used for many things. It can be used, for example, to improve check-in. It can be used for a variety of projects that will allow me to improve the experience of the guest. So I represent each task by a circle, and then I represent by arrows the interactions from task to task. So to build the network diagram, there's a couple of steps. First, you have to identify your activities. Then you have to identify how each activity relates to each other. Then you have to give an estimate of how much time each activity will have. Then you diagram this whole project, and finally you identify the critical path. If you want more details on this, just check my video on scheduling under the project management playlist that I have on this channel as well. So another great technique is simulations. Now simulations, they are typically computer simulations, and nowadays we have many fantastic computer simulations that basically allow you to simulate simulate obviously different situations in a hotel. For example, like complaints. There's simulations for there's many good simulations, for example, for revenue management, but there's also simulations for improving the delivery of the system. And the advantage here indeed is that it allows you in a more controlled environment to kind of play a game where you, without real consequence, where you can see what are the things that typically work and what are the things that don't work and how do they affect your business. So another thing I would like to talk today is targeting specific problem areas in the service delivery system. Okay, so Technically, our objective is this, like during the process of our business, there's going to be specific problems we have to try to improve, right? And how can we prevent problems? Now, we're going to go beyond planning, and we're going to imagine that system is running, everything is good, but we want to make sure that we want to avoid problems. We want to prevent them from happening. So there's three main things here that I believe are important to understand. The order for us to improve our prevention of problems, I believe these three areas are essential. The first one is demand forecasting. In other words, understanding how many guests or how many clients your business might have next week, in 1 month, or in 2 months, or in 3 months. Because understanding the number of guests you're going to have, okay, the more guests you have, the higher probability you're going to have more problems. The other one is training. Okay, training your staff is extremely important to understand that they are the front line, the front workers of avoiding problems in your hotel, in your hospitality industry. And therefore, having them well trained really creates a better experience to your guests, because they are then able to solve problems quicker and more efficient. And finally, to have quality teams. It's not just about training, but many of the problems are necessary to demand teamwork. And having teams that know how to work together, and there's many trainings as well you can do for this to help your team coordination, will prevent a lot of problems. And remember, these people that work in the hotel, they're the ones that a lot of times can identify the areas where there are problems, but that can only happen if there is internal communication with them. So one of the techniques that is used for that is called the pokayokis. So this is a Japanese technique that I really like, because basically what they do is a little bit like a health checkup, right? We do a checkup on the system of our business, and we try to identify sources of problems, sources of impact that can generate problems in the future. So we're going to do some inspections, like a health check, and we're going to see what potential sources we have. What are we're going to also have self-inspections. What does that mean? It means that, for example, analyzing how is my management style avoiding or creating problems in the organization. And we're going to have successive analysis as well, which means it's not just about analyzing what goes wrong, but in my opinion, it's also analyzing how each one of the tasks creates a domino effect, and what things are going well and why are they going well. Okay, then what we try to do is to set warnings and controls in case there is a problem, that we have a system that immediately identifies the problem. So have a contact person that in case there's a problem, that person everyone knows that that person has to be contacted, because they have the power to actually solve the problem or to facilitate the problem. Create fixed values for what we call the identification of problems. For example, if a guest, if there is a certain value, or if guests on average are complaining on this, for example, they're giving a rate on the past 3 days, all guests gave a rate of lower than 4 stars on our TripAdvisor, then, for example, this is a fixed value that you can target and measure why is this happening on the past couple of days. And finally, motion steps, which is basically analyzing how each step goes from one step to another, and see if there is any problem on the transmission of information. But remember, we do all this for our customers, we do all this for our guests, and therefore it is important that all these inspections we have is about improving the experience to the guest. Cross-functional projects in matrix organizations can be very good in big organizations, or when you have several projects running down. I covered this as well in my project management class, but just to give you an idea, obviously there's many advantages and disadvantages. And one of the main advantages is you always have 2 points of contact. You have someone that is a project leader on the things you are working, and you have a department head. So for example, you might be working on project A, and you're more specialized on marketing. That means you have 2 people that can help you. You have the marketing director and you have your project manager. This can also mean, and the biggest advantage at the same time, is the fact that you have 2 bosses. All right, and they can give you conflicting information. So here the main issue we have is that you can end up with information from one side and from the other that is the exact opposite of each other. So to summarize here, I think that cross-matrix organization structures are very good for big corporations, or when you have several projects running on the company. But my opinion to you is, if you want to improve the system, then you need a very good project manager that can coordinate all these things at the same time. And therefore, that's why I say this is only worth it when you have complex organizations. So Today I covered a lot of different topics about how to improve systems in hotels and how to improve guest experience. Let me know if you have any comments or any questions you'd like to ask. I'll answer all the comments that I see that you have questions with. So, and if you have any ideas about videos you would like me to talk about in the hospitality industry, let me know. Right? Thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.